The Great Hall of the Galactic War Council stretched out like a metal canyon. Representatives from 47 different worlds sat in their assigned seats, each one carefully designed for their unique biology. The air recyclers worked overtime to keep the atmosphere breathable for so many different species. Commander stood at the center podium, her massive frame casting shadows across the floor. Her forearms moved with practiced authority as she spoke, the bioluminescent scales along her neck flashing bright yellow with confidence. Around her feet, two hounds lay perfectly still, their black eyes scanning the crowd for threats. Each beast was the size of a small vehicle, with teeth that could punch through starship armor. "The Void Swarm has taken 3 more systems," announced, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. "They move faster than we expected. Our intelligence was wrong about their numbers and their abilities." Worried murmurs filled the air. The Void Swarm had appeared 6 months ago at the edge of known space. At first, they seemed like any other hostile alien force, but with each battle they grew stronger and smarter. Worse, they seemed to learn from every encounter. "That is why the Council has decided to deploy the Apex Core," continued. Her scales flashed brighter, showing her pride. The Apex Core was her creation, her masterpiece. It brought together the most dangerous predator species from across the galaxy, creatures that had never known defeat in millions of years of evolution. "The core includes our finest warriors," she said, turning to gesture at the viewing screens. Images appeared showing her forces. The shock troops, who conquered 12 worlds in their first year of space travel. The crystalline, whose bodies can survive in the heart of a star. The storm fighters, who hunt in the methane hurricanes of gas giants. The assembled representatives leaned forward with interest. These were legendary fighters, spoken of in whispers across the galaxy. To see them working together was like watching gods prepare for war. "Each species in the core represents the peak of predatory evolution," said, her 4 arms spreading wide. "They are nature's perfect killers, refined by countless generations of hunting and survival. Against the Void Swarm, we will bring the fury of apex predators." Counselor, an ancient being whose species had been mediating galactic conflicts for thousands of years, raised one of his tentacles. "Commander, the Council appreciates your confidence. However, we believe additional perspectives might be valuable for this mission." Scales shifted to a darker yellow, showing confusion. "Additional perspectives, Counselor." "We propose adding a human representative to your command staff," said carefully. "Earth has proven to be a reliable ally, and their unique approach to warfare might provide useful insights." The change-in was immediate and dramatic. Her scales flashed from yellow to bright orange, then to deep red. The color shift meant many things in her species' language, but right now it clearly showed amusement turning to outright laughter. The sound of her laughter filled the chamber, a harsh barking noise that made several smaller species flinch. Her hounds raised their heads, sensing their master's mood and starting to make low, rumbling sounds that might have been their version of laughter too. "Humans," managed between laughs. "You want to add humans to a force of apex predators," she gestured wildly with all 4 arms. "Have you seen their counselor? Have you studied their biology?" She activated her personal data display, showing images of Earth and its inhabitants. "Look at them. Soft pink skin with no natural protection. Weak jaws with flat teeth designed for grinding plants. No claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. They are so weak that they had to invent tools just to cut their food." More laughter rippled through parts of the council chamber. Many of the assembled aliens had similar thoughts about humans, though few would express them so openly. "Their planet hosts no true apex predators," continued, warming to her subject. "The largest carnivores on Earth are what they call big cats, creatures might could swallow whole. Most of their animal kingdom consists of prey species, grazing animals that run from any threat. Even their companion animals are domesticated versions of small hunters, turned into pets that depend on humans for survival. She paused for effect, letting her words sink in. Counselor, humans are not predators. They are barely even omnivores. They are prey animals who learn to use technology. Against the void swarm, they would last perhaps minutes before their natural instincts told them to run and hide. In the human section of the gallery, sat quietly. He was 53 years old, with graying hair and worn hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. His dark eyes watched without any change in expression. He had heard similar opinions before, from other species, and sometimes even from other humans. The human military record speaks for itself, continued. In every major galactic conflict, they provide support roles: engineering, logistics, medical aid. They fix our ships and supply our armies, but they do not fight on the front lines. And why would they? Evolution did not design them for combat. Counselor's tentacles swayed with what might have been uncertainty. Commander, Earth's representative specifically requested to join your mission. Perhaps we should at least hear what they have to offer. Scales flashed through several colors, finally settling on a bright orange that indicated amused tolerance. Very well, if it will satisfy the Council's need for diplomatic inclusion, I will accept one human observer, but understand this, they will not participate in actual combat operations. I will not risk my warriors' lives because a prey species thinks it can fight alongside true predators. She turned to look directly at, her large eyes focusing on him with laser intensity. You may come along, human. You may observe how real warriors fight. Perhaps you will learn something about what it means to be an apex predator. Stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Thank you, Commander. I look forward to the opportunity. His laugh was sharper this time, more mocking. Just try to stay out of the way when the real fighting begins. Leave the killing to those evolution designed for it. The council session ended with formal approval of the mission. As the representatives began to file out, remained in his seat, watching gather her materials. She was still chuckling to herself, occasionally looking in his direction and shaking her massive head. What she did not notice was watching her too, studying her movements and behavior with the same quiet intensity he brought to everything. His expression never changed, but something in his eyes suggested he was thinking about things far beyond this moment. The war was about to begin, and everyone assumed they knew what it would look like. The transport ship dropped out of hyperspace with a violent shudder that threw against his restraints. Around him, the Apex Core warriors barely noticed the rough transition. They were used to military vessels built for function over comfort. Checked his equipment one more time as the ship approached 442B. The contested planet hung in the viewports like a brown and green marble, its surface by recent void swarm activity. Intelligence reports showed 3 major swarm hives had been established in the northern continent, each one spreading corruption across the landscape like a disease. Human, you will stay in the rear cargo bay during landing, announced Sergeant Al, whose voice sounded like grinding stone. His species stood nearly 8 feet tall, with natural armor plating that could deflect small arms fire. Sharp spines ran along his arms and back, each one capable of extending to become a deadly weapon. Commander's orders. Real soldiers deploy first. Nodded without protest. He had expected this treatment. Around the transport bay, he could see the various predator species preparing for landing in their own unique ways. It was like watching a nature documentary about the galaxy's most dangerous creatures. The shock troops performed ritual combat dances, their spines extending and retracting in complex patterns while they made low growling sounds. It was how they prepared their nervous systems for battle, getting their predatory instincts fully activated. In another section, the crystalline warriors stood perfectly still, their bodies slowly changing color from clear to deep red. They were adjusting their internal structure, hardening themselves for combat. When fully prepared, they could survive direct hits from plasma cannons. They were the strangest to watch. These gas giant adapted beings floated in specialized environmental suits filled with methane. They communicated through chemical signals that made the air around them shimmer with different colors. Their suits were equipped with weapons designed to function in extreme atmospheric conditions. But the most impressive were personal hounds. The massive creatures lay near the drop bay doors, their black eyes constantly scanning for threats. One of them was nearly 12 feet long, its body covered in thick hide that had turned aside everything from plasma bolts to monomolecular blades. Its jaws could bite through starship hull plating. The ship touched down with a heavy thud, and the deployment began immediately. Watch from his position as the apex core flowed out like a river of death. Each species moved with the fluid grace of perfect predators, their every motion speaking of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Stood at the center of the landing zone, all four arms moving as she directed the deployment. Her scales flashed in complex patterns, giving orders to the different species in their own visual languages. She was magnificent to watch, a true apex predator in her element. "Establish perimeter patrol routes," she commanded, her voice carrying easily across the landing zone. "Begin fortification of the eastern approach. Scout the atmospheric conditions above the tree line." The base took shape with military efficiency. Each species worked in their specialized roles but noticed something interesting. Despite being allies, the different predator species maintained careful distances from each other. They gave a wide berth. The hounds watched everyone with suspicious eyes. Even among friends, predators never fully relaxed their guard. Was assigned to a small shelter near the supply depot, well away from the command center. His official role was cultural observer, which seemed to mean staying out of the way and taking notes that nobody would read. But was good at observing. He studied the base layout, the patrol patterns, the way different species interacted. He noticed how they always faced the entrances when they stood still, how they unconsciously positioned themselves near the hardest cover, how they floated slightly higher when other species approached. These were all the behaviors of natural predators, he realized. They were always ready to fight or flee, always watching for threats, always positioning themselves for advantage. It made them incredibly dangerous individually, but it also created interesting problems for unit coordination. On the third day, approached with a suggestion. She was reviewing tactical maps in the command tent, her scales showing the deep blue color that meant intense concentration. "Commander," said quietly, "I've been studying the terrain around the swarm hives. I think there might be a better approach route than the one currently planned." Scales shifted to orange amusement. "Oh, and what makes you think you understand tactics better than warriors who have conquered star systems?" Pulled out his tablet, showing satellite images of the target area. "The current plan calls for a direct assault across open ground, but if we study the swarm's movement patterns, they seem to have blind spots. Their patrols follow very regular routes. If we approach from the southeast, using the ridge line for cover, we could get much closer before being detected." Looked at the images for a moment, then barked out her harsh laugh. "Human, this is not a hunt for small prey on your peaceful. This is war against an enemy that has destroyed entire fleets. We do not sneak and hide like scavengers. We are apex predators. We attack directly, using our superior strength and speed." "But Commander," persisted, "the intelligence reports show that direct assaults have failed 3 times already. Maybe a different approach." "Enough!" Scales flashed bright red, the color of anger and dominance. Around the command tent, other predators looked up from their work, sensing the tension. "You think because you can read satellite images, you understand warfare. You are a prey animal trying to teach hunters how to hunt." She stood to her full height, looming over with all 4 arms spread wide. It was a classic intimidation display, designed to trigger submission responses in smaller creatures. From now on, you will eat with the supply workers and maintenance crews. You will not enter the command tent unless specifically summoned. You will observe in silence, as your role title suggests. Stepped back, his head lowered. To the watching predators, it looked like a natural submission response. The human had challenged the alpha and been properly put in his place. "Yes, Commander," said quietly, "I understand." That evening, sat with the supply workers, eating standard rations while the warriors feasted on fresh meat in the main dining area. The support staff were mostly non-predator species engineers, medics, communications specialists. They treated with polite sympathy, recognizing him as another non-combatant who had to work around the egos of natural killers. "Don't take it personally," said Doctor, a medic whose people resembled large, furry pandas. "Predator species always think they know best about fighting. It's how their brains work. They see challenge, they attack. Very simple." Nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the satellite images, about the swarm's movement patterns, about the way predator instincts worked. Something about this whole situation felt wrong to him, but he could not quite put his finger on what it was. Outside the mess tent, he could hear the hounds making low, rumbling sounds. They did that sometimes at night, for no apparent reason. The other species said it was just their way of marking territory, but wondered if maybe they sensed something the others missed. Tomorrow they would make their first probe toward the swarm positions. Hope's confidence was justified, but something deep in his gut told him this war would be different from anything the Apex Corps had faced before. The attack came at dawn, just as the morning mist began to lift from the valley floor. Was checking supply inventories when the first alarms began to sound. Through the tent walls, he could hear the distinctive whistle scream that meant incoming hostiles. "All units to combat positions." His voice boomed across the camp through the communication system. "This is what we came for. Show these swarm creatures what real predators can do." Dropped his tablet and moved to the observation post that had been set up for non-combatants. From there, he had a clear view of the valley where the Apex Corps was deploying for their first major engagement with the Void Swarm. It was beautiful and terrifying to watch. The shock troops moved in perfect formation, their spines fully extended and gleaming in the morning light. The crystalline had turned deep combat red and were advancing like living tanks across the rough terrain. Above them, the floated in their environmental suits, ready to rain death from the sky. At the center of it all rode one of her massive hounds, the other beast running alongside. Her scales flashed in rapid command patterns, coordinating the attack with the precision of millions of years of predatory evolution. But something was wrong. Felt it first as a pressure in his head, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air becomes heavy and thick. The feeling grew stronger as the Apex Corps moved down into the valley toward the swarm positions. Through his binoculars, could see the enemy for the first time. The intelligence reports had been completely wrong. These were not the mindless drone creatures they had expected. The Void Swarm was a collection of different species, but each one moved with purpose and intelligence. Worse, they were organized in a way that made no sense. Creatures that should have been predators were working alongside obvious prey species. Flying hunters coordinated with ground-based grazers. It was like watching a nightmare version of nature where all the normal rules had been turned upside down. The first clash came when a group of shock troops encountered a swarm patrol. The charged with their traditional battle cry, spines extended, ready to tear through the enemy formation. But something strange happened. As they got closer to the swarm creatures, they began to slow down. Their battle cry faded to uncertain growls. By the time they were within striking distance, they had almost stopped completely. The swarm creatures surrounded them without resistance. The warriors, who had never known defeat in their entire evolutionary history, stood frozen as if paralyzed. "What are they doing?" heard one of the supply workers ask. "Why aren't they fighting?" The same thing was happening across the battlefield. They had stopped their advance and were backing away from swarm positions, their crystal bodies flickering with uncertainty. They were gaining altitude, moving away from the ground forces instead of supporting them. Most shocking of all, hounds had simply refused to enter the valley. The massive creatures, each one a perfect killing machine, were backing away from the swarm with their tails low and their ears flat against their heads. They were showing classic submission behavior. "This is impossible," was saying over the communication channel, her voice tight with confusion and growing panic. "They're apex predators. They don't retreat. They don't show submission." But they were doing exactly that. Across the battlefield, the galaxy's most dangerous predators were freezing up in the face of the void swarm. Some were backing away. Others simply stood still, as if waiting for permission to leave. The swarm, meanwhile, was adapting to everything they saw. When a group tried to use their plasma weapons, the swarm creatures quickly developed countermeasures. When they attempted aerial attacks, the swarm responded with new anti-air capabilities that appeared within minutes. It was learning, not just copying, but actually understanding and improving on everything it encountered. And somehow, it was doing something to the predator species that was triggering deep-seated survival responses. Watched a warrior, a creature that had personally conquered 3 star systems, simply lay down his weapons and curl into a defensive ball when a group of swarm creatures approached. The warrior was not injured or unconscious. He was awake and aware, but completely unable to fight. "All units fall back to secondary positions," ordered, her voice now showing clear distress. "Tactical withdrawal, reform at Rally Point Alpha." But the withdrawal was turning into a rout. The apex predators were not making an organized retreat. They were fleeing in barely controlled panic, their natural instincts completely overriding their military training. Grabbed the communication headset from the observation post. "This is requesting immediate orbital support on Vector 77 Alpha. We have wounded personnel who need emergency evacuation." "Human, get off this channel," snapped. "This is for military personnel only." "Commander, with respect, you have 18 wounded who can't move and 12 who are completely shut down. They need medical evacuation now, or we're going to lose them all." Began calling out coordinates for pickup zones, directing the rescue shuttles to safe landing areas away from the swarm advance. His voice was calm and steady, completely different from the panic that was spreading through the predator ranks. "Medical Shuttle Bravo 4, land at coordinates 237 Mark 8. You'll find a group of whose environmental suits have been damaged. Priority evacuation." "Shuttle Alpha 2, there's a hound trapped in Section 5. It's not injured, but it won't move. You'll need the heavy lift equipment." While coordinated the evacuation, he watched the swarm with growing understanding. They were not attacking the fleeing predators with full force. Instead, they seemed to be studying them, learning from their retreat patterns and reactions. The swarm was not just winning this battle. They were conducting an experiment, gathering data about how apex predators behaved under stress. And somehow, they had found a way to trigger responses that made fighting impossible for species that had never learned to back down. "Evacuation complete," announced 2 hours later. "All personnel accounted for and returning to base." The silence on the communication channel was deafening. For the first time in the history of the Apex Corps, they had been completely defeated without the enemy even trying very hard. His voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. How did this happen? We are apex predators. We are nature's perfect killers. How could we just stop?" Looked out at the valley, where the swarm was already beginning to establish new positions. They moved with the same coordinated purpose, but now he could see something else in their behavior. They looked satisfied, like researchers who had just completed a successful experiment. "Commander," said quietly, "I think we need to have a very serious discussion about what we're really fighting." The medical bay was packed with warriors who showed no visible injuries but could barely function. Shock troops sat in corners with their spines retracted, staring at nothing. Crystals had gone completely clear, a sign of deep stress in their species. Even the mighty hounds lay motionless, occasionally whimpering like frightened puppies. Doctor moved between the patients with growing confusion. His scanner readings made no sense. "There's nothing physically wrong with them," he told, his 4 tentacles waving with agitation. "No poison, no disease, no neural damage, but their stress hormone levels are completely off the charts." Stood at the center of the bay, her scales cycling through colors that had never seen before, deep purples and sickly greens that seemed to indicate something beyond normal fear or anger. Her 4 arms hung at her sides, and for the first time since meeting her, she looked lost. "Run the tests again," she ordered. "There has to be an explanation. My warriors do not simply stop fighting. They are apex predators. They have conquered dozens of worlds. They do not know how to be afraid." Doctor's scan results appeared on the main display screen. Charts and graphs showed hormone levels, brain activity, and biological responses from the affected warriors. Every single readout showed the same pattern: extreme stress responses that were completely out of proportion to any actual physical threat. "Commander, I've been studying the bio readings from the battle," Doctor said carefully. "What I'm seeing doesn't make sense according to everything we know about predator psychology." Stepped forward from where he had been quietly observing. During the evacuation, several of the medical staff had noticed that he was the only one who remained completely calm under pressure. Doctor had been scanning him too, and the results were fascinating. "Doctor, what exactly are you seeing in those readings?" asked. Doctor manipulated the display, showing brain scans from different species during the battle. Every predator species shows the same pattern. As they approached the swarm positions, their brains began activating ancient survival circuits. Not fight or flight responses, this is something much deeper. Submission responses. Scales flashed angry red. "Impossible. Apex predators do not submit. We are the ones others submit to." "That's exactly the problem," Doctor said, his tentacles moving faster with excitement as the pieces came together. "Commander, every species in the apex core evolved alongside other predators. On every, there were competitors, threats, things that could challenge an apex predator's dominance." He brought up evolutionary charts on the display. "Look at the... Yes, your people became the dominant species, but you evolved alongside the hunters and the shadow stalkers. You learned when to fight and when to retreat, when to be aggressive and when to show submission to avoid a fight you couldn't win." Watchd's expression change as understanding began to dawn. Doctor continued his explanation. "The same pattern exists for every species in our force. The evolved competing with other crystalline species. They had to deal with storm predators in their gas giant homes. Even the, for all their size and strength, learned to respect the great sky hunters of their world." "What are you saying?" asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. "I'm saying the Void Swarm has evolved specifically to trigger these submission responses. They're not just another enemy. They're something that every predator instinct recognizes as too dangerous to fight. Something that makes apex predators remember what it feels like to be prey." Doctor pulled up another scan, this one showing during the battle. The human's brain patterns were completely different from everyone else's. But look at this. The human showed no submission responses at all. His stress hormones actually decreased during the battle. His brain activity became more focused, not less. Stared at the readings. "That's impossible. Humans are prey animals. They should have the strongest flight response of anyone here." "No," Doctor said quietly, "that's where we've been wrong. Humans aren't prey animals. They're not apex predators either." He paused, studying the data with growing amazement. "There's something else entirely." Had been silent during this exchange, but now he spoke. "Doctor, May I see the comparative evolution data for Earth? Doctor brought up Earth's evolutionary history on the display. Unlike every other world represented in the apex core, Earth's chart looked different. Where other planets showed clear predator-prey relationships and dominance hierarchies, Earth showed something unique. Look at this pattern, said, pointing to specific sections of the data. On every other world, species evolved to be either predators or prey with clear specializations. But on Earth, humans evolved as persistence hunters. He turned to face directly. Commander, your people became apex predators by being bigger, stronger, and more aggressive than their competitors. You developed overwhelming force and intimidation displays. When you met something that could match your strength, you learned to back down to avoid costly fights. Gestured to the other species in the medical bay. Same pattern for everyone here. You're all optimized for short, decisive encounters where the strongest wins quickly. That's why the swarm's psychological pressure works on you. You recognize something that could cost you more than you're willing to pay. And humans are different how? Asked, though her scales were showing the blue color that meant she was beginning to understand. Humans never became apex predators, said simply. We became apex killers. We didn't win by being the strongest or fastest. We won by being the ones who never stopped coming. Doctor was nodding as he studied the evolutionary data. Persistence hunting. Your species would chase prey animals for days or weeks, never giving them time to rest or recover. Not the biggest, not the strongest, but absolutely relentless. Walked over to one of the windows, looking out at the valley where the swarm had established their positions. On Earth, we hunted woolly mammoths by following them until they collapsed from exhaustion. We drove entire species extinct not through single battles, but through constant, unending pressure. The key difference, Doctor said, his excitement growing, is that persistence hunters don't have the same psychological limitations as apex predators. An apex predator will back down when the cost becomes too high, but a persistence hunter doesn't calculate cost the same way. Scales were cycling through colors, had never seen deep blues mixed with silver, patterns that seemed to indicate a fundamental shift in how she viewed the world. You're saying humans don't have submission responses? Oh, we have them, said, turning back to face her. But they're triggered by different things. The swarm's psychological pressure is designed to make predators calculate whether a fight is worth the cost, but humans didn't evolve to make those calculations. He moved closer to the display showing the battle readings. When the swarm tried to trigger submission responses in me, my brain interpreted it as confirmation that this was prey worth hunting. The harder they pressed, the more focused I became. Doctor was studying his scanner readings with amazement. Your stress response system is completely backwards from a predator's perspective. Danger makes you more determined, not less. Nodded. Commander, when you asked me what humans are, I should have been more precise. We're not the thing that apex predators become. We're the thing that apex predators have nightmares about. What do you mean? Looked directly into her large predator eyes, and for the first time since meeting him, felt something she had never experienced before. Not fear, exactly, but a deep recognition that she was in the presence of something fundamentally different from herself. We're the thing that never stops hunting, said quietly. We're the thing that doesn't care how big you are, how strong you are, or how dangerous you are. We're the thing that will follow you until you make a mistake, and then we'll be there waiting. The medical bay fell completely silent. Even the wounded warriors seemed to sense that something important was being discussed. The swarm expects predators, continued. They've evolved to handle apex species that fight with strength and dominance, but they've never encountered a species that wins through simple, implacable persistence. Scales had settled into a deep, steady blue, the color her people used to show respect to a superior. What are you suggesting, human? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to stop fighting them like predators, said, and start hunting them like humans. The second assault began at midnight under the light of 3 moons. But this time, everything was different. Walked at the front of the formation, and behind him came the aliens. Not because they had been ordered to follow, but because something in the way he moved triggered instincts they didn't fully understand. Every predator species in the apex core found themselves staying close to the human, as if he represented safety in a way that had nothing to do with strength or weapons. "Remember," said quietly into his communicator, his voice carrying to all units, "we're not here to win a battle. We're here to start a hunt. The swarm expects predators who fight hard and fast. We're going to do something completely different." Moved beside him, her massive hounds flanking them both. The beasts had completely recovered once they got away from the swarm's psychological pressure, but now they stayed close to as if recognizing something familiar in his behavior. "Human," she said, using his name with a respect that would have seemed impossible just days before. "My warriors are still affected by whatever the swarm does to predator minds. How do we fight when our instincts work against us?" Checked his equipment one more time. Unlike the high-tech weapons carried by the alien warriors, he had chosen simple, reliable tools. A basic plasma rifle, standard body armor, and a field pack loaded with supplies. "Commander, you don't fight it. You follow my lead and trust me to do what humans do best." The approach to the swarm positions was completely different from their first assault. Instead of a direct charge across open ground, led them in a wide, slow circle. They moved at walking pace, taking their time, never rushing despite the fact that swarm scouts had undoubtedly detected them. "This is wrong," muttered Sergeant Al, his spines twitching with nervous energy. "We should attack quickly, use our superior firepower while they're unprepared." "No," said simply. "Quick attacks are what predators do. We're going to do something the swarm has never seen before. We're going to be patient." As they got closer to the swarm perimeter, the aliens began to feel the familiar pressure that had paralyzed them before. The psychological weight that made their predator instincts scream warnings about danger and the high cost of fighting. But kept walking forward at the same steady pace, and somehow his presence made it easier for them to continue. When a warrior began to slow down, would simply nod at him and keep moving, and the warrior would find himself able to continue. "Contact front," called one of the scouts. "Swarm patrol, approximately 40 creatures moving to intercept." In their first battle, this would have triggered an immediate charge. Predator instincts would have demanded either overwhelming assault or tactical withdrawal, but did something that confused everyone, including the swarm. He stopped. "All units establish a perimeter and take defensive positions," he ordered calmly. "No one engages unless directly attacked. We wait." "Wait for what?" asked. "For them to make the first mistake." The swarm patrol approached cautiously. Could see them through his scope, the same mixed collection of absorbed species, all working together with unnatural coordination. They moved in the complex patterns that had allowed them to adapt so quickly to predator tactics. But when they reached optimal attack range and the apex core still hadn't charged, something strange happened. The swarm creatures stopped, as if confused by behavior that didn't match their expectations. Waited. The aliens waited with him, their predator instincts still screaming at them to either fight or flee, but somehow finding it possible to simply stay still, because the human beside them showed no sign of stress or urgency. Minutes passed, then hours. The swarm patrol began to show signs of agitation. They had evolved to handle the quick, decisive encounters that characterized predator behavior. Their psychological weapons were designed to trigger immediate fight-or-flight responses, but the apex core wasn't doing either. They were just waiting, watching, being present. "Movement on the left flank," reported a scout. "They're trying to flank us." "Let them," said. "Adjust positions to maintain visual contact but do not engage." More swarm creatures began to arrive, drawn by the unusual situation. Soon the Apex Core was surrounded by nearly 200 enemies, all of them maintaining attack positions but seeming uncertain about what to do next. Studied them through his binoculars. The swarm's behavior was becoming more erratic. They were used to enemies that either attacked or retreated. This patient, persistent presence was something their evolved responses couldn't process properly. "They're adapting," Doctor reported from his position. "But their adaptations seem confused. They're preparing for multiple different types of assault simultaneously." Nodded. "That's because they don't understand what we're doing. They're trying to adapt to counter tactics that we're not using." As dawn approached, something began to change in the swarm creatures. Their coordinated movements became less precise. Individual creatures started showing signs of stress behaviors that suggested the hive mind was having difficulty maintaining control. "Sir," called out an observer, "something's wrong with them. They're starting to separate from their group formations." Smiled grimly. "They're not used to extended encounters. Their absorption process works best on species that make quick decisions, but we're not making any decisions at all. We're just here." The psychological pressure that had paralyzed the predators in their first encounter was still present, but it was no longer affecting the Apex Core the same way. With calm presence anchoring them, they had learned to simply endure it rather than react to it. But the swarm creatures were beginning to react to the pressure of the humans' relentless, patient observation. Some of them began to back away. Others started making small, nervous movements that broke their formation discipline. "They're scared," said with amazement, her scales shifting to colors that indicated wonder. "The swarm is actually afraid of us." "Not of us," corrected. "Of what we represent. They understand predators. They can adapt to any form of aggression, any battle tactic, any form of dominance display. But they've never encountered something that wins through pure persistence." The breakthrough came when one of the swarm creatures, some kind of absorbed predator species, suddenly broke ranks and fled. Its departure triggered a cascade effect as other creatures began to follow. "Now," said quietly. The Apex Core began to advance. Not quickly, not with the aggressive charge of predators, but with the steady, inexorable pace of persistent hunters. They maintained their formation and continued to move forward at walking speed, simply following the retreating swarm forces. "Shouldn't we pursue at full speed?" asked Sergeant Al. "We could catch them." "No," replied. "That would turn this back into a predator encounter. They could adapt to that. Instead, we just keep following. No matter how fast they run, no matter where they go, we'll still be here, still coming." The retreat became a rout. Swarm creatures that had never known fear were experiencing something their hive mind couldn't process. The absolute certainty that these strange hunters would never stop, never give up, never accept any outcome except complete victory. Within 6 hours, the entire swarm presence on 442B had withdrawn to their ships and departed the system. They left behind their established hives, their resource extraction operations, everything they had built. "Incredible," Doctor said as he studied the readings. "They're not just retreating tactically. Their entire neural network is showing panic responses. They're genuinely terrified." Stood on a hill overlooking the abandoned swarm positions. Behind him, the Apex Core was still advancing at the same steady pace, ready to pursue the enemy across star systems if necessary. Approached him, her scales showing the deep blue of profound respect. "Human," she said formally, "I owe you an apology. I mistook persistence for weakness." Nodded, watching the swarm ships disappear into hyperspace. "Commander, on Earth we have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Your apex predators are magnificent killers. They're the best the galaxy has ever seen at what they do." "And what do humans do?" Turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something that chilled her to her core. Not malice or aggression, but simple, terrifying certainty. We're the thing that never stops hunting. We're the thing that follows you across continents, across star systems, across galaxies if necessary. We're the thing that waits outside your home until you make a mistake. 3 days later, monitoring stations across the galaxy detected a swarm transmission broadcast on all frequencies. It was short and simple. Warning to all vessels, avoid Sol 3. The persistent ones dwell there. They do not hunt as others hunt. They do not stop. They do not tire. They do not accept defeat. If you value your existence, do not wake them from their slumber. Cultural observer and representative of Earth's diplomatic corps, filed his mission report as the Apex Corps returned to their home bases. The report was classified at the highest levels and distributed to military commands throughout human space. Its final line read, "Recommendation: establish persistence hunting protocols for future engagements. Humans are most effective when allowed to do what humans do best: be absolutely, relentlessly, unstoppably human." In the depths of space, the Void Swarm continued its expansion across distant galaxies, but their route now included a wide detour around a small yellow star, where something dwelt that their vast intelligence could not understand or adapt to. Something that hunted not with fang and claw, but with time and patience and the terrible certainty that it would never, ever give up.